What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Worship Sound Guy podcast. And I got to tell you, you need to get your notepads, your pencils, all your school supplies for this one because James Arthur Hurley is about to take you to school. This is an incredible episode. We're talking about live streaming. We're talking immersive audio, all kinds of amazing things with James. He has been just such a wealth of knowledge for this episode. It is like a little mini masterclass on live sound and broadcast audio. So if you're ready for that, let's jump into the episode with James Arthur Hurley. All right, everybody, welcome to the Worship Sound Guy podcast. We are here with the one, the only James Arthur Hurley. If you've been kind of in the Instagram, TikTok, live production, church production scene, you've definitely come across James and his content. He's an incredible mixer. So excited to have him on the podcast. James, welcome. It's good to chat with you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure, man. And obviously we're here with Matt Borsick as well, the other co-founder of Worship Sound Guy. Always good to chat, Matt.
Oh, yeah.
Illustrious.
I'm excited for today, y'all. This is going to be fun. We're about to have a good time.
It's going to be good. Okay, so James, tell us what have you been up to lately? Where are you mixing at? What are you doing? You're in a studio. You got speakers behind you. We're going to talk all about it.
All right, yeah. Been rolling hard this year with a bunch of Atmos mixes, which is a new, not new for me, but new to like the market for me because I've been traditionally a stereo guy. But about 2 years ago, I started looking into Atmos and investing in that. So I've been doing a lot of that recently, which has been fantastic. And just prior to this podcast, I was rushing like a crazy chipmunk trying to clean up the studio because I just finished a rewire.
That's amazing.
That's a whole story in itself. So yeah, just finished up Joel Barnes. Ty did an amazing job with the stereo mixes, and Taiwan, the producer, and Joel, the writing and everything. It just, the team played so well. It's just been, that project is probably one of the best projects I've ever been a part of in terms of like, I mean, I can't tell you the number of time we were all in tears just in rehearsals. It was very powerful. So if you haven't checked out The Good Shepherd yet, it's released, it's out. It is absolutely, it's something you need just for yourself, just for your own edification, not let alone doing it in church or whatever. I do it in church, please. There's plenty of bangers on there. Yeah. So that was the first big Atmos release to come out of my new room here, which is fantastic. Cool. And it was a lot of fun. Then been doing a lot of, do you know Gracie Binion?
I know the name. I've never listened to her, I don't think.
She's fantastic, younger artist. I can't remember where specifically she's at, but she's a great writer. A lot of, like, she writes in the Christian space, the style of music that I used to listen to at coffee shops when I was doing work and stuff like that. It's just great listen, great lyrics, really authentic. The team there on her album did an amazing job with the production. And Ryan, I hope I say his name right. Classy. I want to call him Classy because he's a classy dude. Yeah, he did this. He did the stereo mixes and hit me up to do the Atmos after Jaws because he's actually a fantastic guitar player as well. So he hit me up to do the Atmos for him, and they're just another brilliant run of tracks. I think I've done 4 for her. 3 haven't hit distros yet, so there's a I don't know what's going on there. They've been delivered, but they haven't actually gone up to, like, they've been delivered 2 distros, but they haven't actually gone up yet. So that's its old corporate world figuring out where those are. That was a lot of fun. I've got another one coming up this week that I'll be finishing up for actually Yamari, Ty Mahowan's wife, who's a brilliant writer and performer. So that'll be good. So that's been the studio world. Dude,
you've been busy.
I've been running around trying to get lots done. Yeah. Been helping a couple churches here, a couple 7-day Adventist churches, which are fantastic churches. Get the president of this conference out here started a project, and about 4 weeks into it, I hit him. This is a God story. I hit him up because I was looking for an extra day of work. My wife started school, bills. And I was like, hey, do you have anybody who needs some help with audio or whatever? And he's like, guess what? I'm in Dallas and I just started a church. Can I see you in 2 hours?
Nice.
Yes. And he was an old friend. He's an old friend of mine. And so I jumped in there and got them going. Did another DM7 install at another church recently, and They just had a 20th anniversary for their youth service that they started. And so that was a lot of fun. And then, my normal trek, I've been working at Open Door Church in South Fort Worth and Burleson, and just enjoying life with that team there. They're super talented, super amazing people. The church is doing amazing things, rescuing kids and feeding people all over the world directly, which is amazing. A lot of churches will partner with a ministry doing stuff like that. These guys are literally out there doing it, directly from their team, as well as partnering with other people. So yeah, it's been a great first half of, probably a little more than the first half of 2024.
We're past halftime, man. 2024 is flying.
I know. I can't believe it. It's my last 30s this year, and I'm like, it needs to slow down. I need to enjoy the last few months of this.
Yeah, I feel it.
I'm an old guy.
Oh, I think we're all getting up there, man.
What was that? We were talking somewhere recently, Johnny. We were like, wait a second.
Yeah.
We're the old guys now. Hold on. When did this happen?
I know, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it is, man. Once you get on the other side of 35, it starts going really, really fast. It's wild. Okay, so tell me about, how does the Atmos mixing process work? Are you getting like sort of pre-processed stems that you're then assigning to all your Atmos nodes and all that kind of good stuff? How does that whole process work for you as specifically an Atmos engineer who's working with tracks that are already being done with a stereo mix by somebody else?
So for me, excuse me, if the stereo engineer is working in Pro Tools, I just ask for a clean session. So
cool.
leave the mix as it is, leave all your plugins on, remove any old playlists, any extraneous tracks, all that, because I work primarily in Pro Tools. So I'll pull their stereo mix up. I'll pull the stereo master in from the mastering engineer. I'll throw it into, I have like a pre-structured template that lets me route the master to the right outputs and all that kind of stuff, so that I can, the goal is to honor the stereo mix and the stereo master in feeling and tone as close as I possibly can, while taking the mix and expanding it from a stereo field to a full 360 half dome kind of a thing. And it's very, very different. I can't remember who was talking about it recently, but they put it pretty well. When you have that much more space to deal with, you don't have to worry about clamping down on things so much with dynamics control or EQ or things like that. It's like, if your acoustic guitar and your keyboard are fighting over here or wherever you put them in the stereo, when you move one over here, all of a sudden they each have a space, and they don't need to be. It's just a different mindset in mixing. And then there's what kind of space you put around stuff in terms of reverb and movement, and it's a lot of fun to interpret what people were intending out of two speakers that are either right in front of you or on the side of your head. It's fun to interpret what they're trying to get you to experience, but actually around you. Yeah. And the conversation has been, well, not everybody's got Atmos and all that other stuff. Well, the great thing about Atmos is, you probably do. It's deliverable for pretty much anybody who can listen to Tidal, Amazon Music, or Apple Music on headphones. Yeah. And then 99% of the sound bars that are delivered today, a lot of the TVs that are out today, a lot of the higher end cars, not like supercars, but a lot of the higher end cars are Atmos equipped. If they're not yet, they will be soon. The format itself is dynamic. It's dynamically scalable to whatever your actual physical format that you're purchasing or enjoying your music from. All of your smartphone or smart devices, so your Amazon, like your speakers and your Googles and all that kind of stuff, they're all Atmos capable to some point as well. So that the format itself is already, you probably already have something you can enjoy it on. And it's not, so when you think immersive audio or Atmos mixes, it's not about, I need to sit around, in the middle of 12 speakers or 14 speakers or whatever. It's about being immersed in the music, however that is being delivered to you, right? Yeah. So like when you walk past an Atmos TV, it's like, all of a sudden the music is around you, and not just some cheap upmixed, phasey thing. It's actually properly being decorrelated and delivered to you in a way that you are inside the music, which is amazing. So that's sort of like, it's the fun of learning how to figure all that out. But there's still the conversation with a lot of people I have are like, oh, well, nobody's really into Atmos right now, or nobody cares about Atmos. I'm like, you don't now, but you will. there's the whole Spotify thing right now too, where they're not trying to pay artists, they're trying to pay less and all that, or Apple's turning around and going, well, we'll pay you more, give us an Atmos deliverable, right? So we'll pay you more for streams. So there's a lot of push up, and it's been a lot of fun. So yeah, sorry, long-winded answer.
I love that.
It doesn't matter how it's delivered to me. If it can only be stems that are printed, then I'll work with the stems.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. Okay, so that makes me kind of start thinking about, obviously we're seeing the immersive, I hesitate to even call it a trend. I feel like it really is kind of like more of a movement, like a conscious movement towards more immersive audio in the live space as well. How do you feel about that and like kind of the viability of that in like the live event space, church or concert or whatever?
So this is my favorite conversation about this. So immersive for consumer audio is different than immersive for live production environments. It's a different, the goal that you're trying to achieve is different, right? So the most amazing example of this that I can try to articulate was L Acoustics did a demo here in Dallas of their Lisa system. And I went out because I was pretty skeptical. I was like, this is where I was like, you're trying to sell more speakers, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Right. Anyway, so the guys at L Acoustics were really good at this demo. It wasn't like, oh, come listen to our stuff. It was like sit down. We're going to chat about it for a minute. We're going to talk you through how it works. And as an engineer, how you approach it and all that stuff. And then they let us walk the space and get on the console. And this church was previously looking at like a $2 million speaker. It's a big church, a $2 million L Acoustics K series line array, big. And somebody, I think it was, if it wasn't at the integrator, it was at L Acoustics themselves, actually said, hey, if you pivot this to Lisa, we can save you some money.
Wow.
And I was blown away by that approach because it's like, hey, don't you want to sell more boxes? Well, they were trying to sell Lisa as a product to get it in front of people. But what it turned out practically to be was much less boxes than the K arrays. Smaller boxes placed in more places. And then the way they work it is they decorrelate, which means make sure that the two sounds coming out of two different speakers aren't going to be interacting. They're not the same, like just decorrelated from each other so that anywhere you sit in the room, you are experiencing a field of sound. I'm not going to say stereo and I don't want to say immersive, but you are experiencing a field of sound that communicates what's going on stage. You know those side seats on the stairs going up to the balcony or like, the back corner of the balcony or whatever?
Sure, yeah.
All of those seats now were immersed in the sound instead of just hearing one thing out of like that point over there. Unbelievable. And I was like, I get it now.
Yeah.
I get it.
Dude, the very similar experience for both me and Matt. We got to hear a demo of D&B's soundscape system at Philo. And like previously, I've heard Atmos rigs and studios and stuff before. It's very cool. Like it's interesting. I am not a big fan of Atmos on like earbuds for the most part, but I'm like, okay, I get it. Like
there's reasons for that.
Oh yeah. But I'm like, yeah, maybe this could be cool. I don't know. I'm a little skeptical. And then stepping in front of those speakers and just hearing like the like ridiculous amount of width and soundstage that they're able to get, and how they're like, yeah, like it's like we're tricking you, into thinking like you're hearing something from like very far away, very presently. And it's not that weird situation where it's like, oh, well, I'm sitting in front of the piano speaker, I'm only hearing piano or whatever. And I was like, man, like this actually sounds really incredible. And getting to like move from side to side, front to back, and being like, dang, like it really does, like it really does what it claims to do, which is incredible.
So as a designer, I've taken that concept forward where you have difficult rooms, and I usually will tell people that are asking me, hey, what do I do? I'm like, hey, have you considered Lisa? And then the response is, oh, well, isn't that more boxes? I'm like, no, it's actually a problem solver. It's the same. It's the extension of the conversation between point source or line array.
Yeah.
Well, now it's point source, line array, or immersive. What does your room need? Right.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic to have another tool in the toolbox to actually communicate what it is we're trying to communicate as production expert or production professionals to our audiences. So
yeah, I'm especially so. You mentioned balconies earlier, and I'm excited for like. We have a couple venues here in Atlanta, like the Fox Theater comes to mind, where it's just like 20% of the venue sounds really good, and the rest of it just like all the balconies, all the under balcony, it just sounds like trash. And so it's like if you're not in a very particular spot, you just really get a subpar listening experience. And I'm like, man, Immersive is the perfect vehicle to solve that problem.
Yep, exactly. So you get like, you might get 90% of the audience that actually, maybe even more, 95% of the audience that actually going to experience something that they're going to remember instead of that 20%. So yeah, totally.
Yeah, definitely.
Your comment,
cool.
Your comment about the Atmos on headphones, that's because there's a lot of bad Atmos mixes.
Dude, that's really true. I go on a little soapbox here, but yeah, I just like when it first was available, like I've got the AirPod Pros right now. That's the kind of like consumer earbud. And, they came out the whole like, playlist like specifically made for Atmos, like all this stuff. And I was like, oh, cool, this would be so awesome. And I played, I'm like, this doesn't even sound good. Like, it just sounds really bad. Like, this is just.
There's two issues at play there. One, the labels didn't care. They literally were throwing masters at interns and saying, make this to Atmos. So they weren't checking. They didn't care. And then Apple is refining their spatial algorithm that reinterprets the Atmos masters into their own how they're delivering. There's actually a Dolby reason for that. It's not an Apple thing, but they're updating that. Sorry, my whatever is yelling at me over there. I don't want to say her name, but there's what was I saying? Their algorithm is updated almost every time that you get an iOS or a Mac update. So they're trying to improve it. The best case would be if they would just deliver you the Dolby binaural.
Yeah.
But the Dolby binaural information isn't included in the JD Press JOC, which is the file that's given to the distros. So because of space, like the actual Atmos ADM is huge. We're talking gigabytes versus megabytes.
Right.
And it takes storage space and all that to have that ADM sitting on your server to stream it to people. But the JD Plus JOC is way smaller. And it currently doesn't include the metadata for binaural. And until Dolby decides to change that, you're going to have Apple doing their thing to save server space and all that kind of stuff. So
that's so interesting. Because obviously I've heard like binaural mixes that sound insane.
They're almost always better than Apple Spatial.
Yeah. I'm just like, this is so good. And then I heard like quote unquote Atmos, like, via Apple, to headphones. And I was like, oh, this is just weird.
I usually tell people I'm like, here's how you listen to it on Apple Spatial, but don't make any mixed decisions based on it.
Yeah.
Or critiques or give me revision notes on Apple Spatial because I give them the binaural directly and I'll be like, if you have a comment and you want to judge it off the binaural, use the binaural file.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Man, it's super interesting. Okay. So in addition to doing all this stuff, you're such a busy guy. You've mixed for Hillsong, Brian and Katie Torwalt, Mosaic, Carrie Job, SEU, like so many people. How I feel like we get a lot of like messages and stuff like, how do we like get connections outside the church, maybe mix for an artist or something like that? How did some of that stuff sort of happen for you, like to end up mixing for different artists and things like that?
It's all been through relationship. So, like I know that the Brian and Katie thing, I got a phone call from somebody. And then after that first phone call, it was Brian would call me directly a couple times because he probably doesn't do it as much anymore. He probably has more management as their career has progressed. But like it was out of relationship. Brian would say, "Hey man, we're doing this. Are you available?" And most of the other things were the same way. I just made you guys disappear. Sorry. With Mosaic. It was a guy that I had built a relationship with who's now touring with some amazing people. He was becoming less and less available to Mosaic and he called and he said, "Hey, can I give your name to these guys? They need training and their broadcast is really in a way and their front of house is really in a way." And there was reasons why they had gone through that. They had not split. They had actually started another campus. And so it resulted in basically gutting their production teams for their main campus.
Wow. Okay.
So, at the time the production manager called me, said, "I got your name from Nathan." And, and we chatted and we started this 2-year relationship, which was fantastic before pandemic and all that happened. And it's the same with all the other ones. I tell guys all the time, you got to get out and you have to get your name out there in the same way that we've done it for years. Yeah. Go to your regional rental house. Go to your largest local church that might need help for a big event and just say, hey, I'm from this church. Like, don't leave your church to do this. Please don't do that.
Yep.
But like say, hey, if you have a big event coming up, I'd like to learn more. We don't really do a lot of this at our church. It's only 200 people or 500 people or whatever. So can you think of me when you have a big event coming? I'd like to come wrap cables. Same thing with the local rental house. I'd like to come wrap cables. And before you know it, you're starting to do these things alongside other people who either have the contacts themselves and might need a sub, or you're meeting people and you're building good relationships. And it's all about authenticity. You can be good at what you do and be authentic about who you are. And those two things will get you very, very, very far. It's really that simple. And everything that have been blessed to do has come out of first the relationship and not being fake about who I am. And second, being committed and faithful to developing my craft so that when somebody asks me to do something, I can deliver on that faithfully and to their expectation or better. And that makes them want to call me again. And the relationship continues. And it's a cycle at that point. And then the other thing to remember on the flip side of that is typically in this environment, when you say no, you're not going to get the no phone calls because they don't like you anymore. You're going to say no because you're unavailable, right? So if at all possible, when there's a gig that comes up, that, like I'm talking like if you have a conflict with like, oh, I was thinking about going out to this thing or go friends with that, like, there might be a point where you go, hey, my kid's birthday, my kid's 10th birthday's coming up. I can't do it. That's a fair call. But if it's like, hey, we're going to go out that weekend to go camping or whatever, it's like, yeah, no, I can do it. Sorry guys, I'm not going camping. Right? Like there's a make sure that you're available, and definitely do not take a gig and then say yes to another gig and cancel on the first gig. Do not do that.
Yeah. That's the worst party foul ever.
Massive. Because I guarantee you somebody's going to find out the industry is small. Oh yeah. Right. So somebody's going to be like, oh, that guy, I'm pretty sure he bailed on us for this thing once before. And it's like, don't do that.
That's the first thing I feel like people do. Like if you don't know, like anyone who's making a hiring decision or trying to staff a crew, like they're asking around, like, hey, does anybody know this name? Like, we're trying this new guy. Does anybody know him? I've done that before. I've texted people, has anybody worked with this guy? And so if literally the only feedback they get is, oh yeah, he can, but he no-showed, or like he canceled last minute, I'm like, not even going to call.
Yep. Same. I think, we've had so many people who just lately on the podcast who've kind of talked about this subject with, and the answer is literally always the same. It's always be good at what you do, be a really good person to work with, and just get out there and do work. Like no matter what it is, like go wrap cables. Don't try to be all glamorous on your first thing. Just go wrap cables, do the grunt work,
totally.
Do whatever they ask you.
26 years or so down the road, I can't remember what the number is now, but like I'll still wrap cables.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
And I don't have to be the guy pushing faders at front of house. Like I'll go wrap cables, and it's the same thing at broadcast or monitors or whatever it is, and the guys that make a full on career, like my career is multifaceted. Like I do many, many things, but if I was focusing only on live shows, you better believe I'd be learning how to be a good lighting guy, a good projection tech or LED tech, crew chief, like all those things. I would be trying to upskill myself out of audio, not to be out of audio, but to make sure that like when I get the phone call from the elevation tour or whatever the heck it is, and they like, hey, we need a production manager on this next run. Or is it something you do? Yep, I got you. Yep. And I've got the runs under my belt to make sure that that's a successful win for you, and not just the audio. So many guys I know are the production manager, the tour manager, and the front of house guy, and they set their monitor console up and leave. Right? like legit. That's how people get started. It's not, I'm going to go out and be a monitor engineer. Well, you're probably going to be the bus driver, the all of these things, and then the monitor engineer, and the front of house guy from the venue is probably going to do front of house. Right? Like these are realities of that. So
yeah, for sure. That's such good advice. Okay, speaking of you mentioned streaming a little bit ago. You got a lot of thoughts on live streaming and best practices and all that kind of stuff. And obviously, I don't know if we'll have announced it by the time this podcast goes up, but we're doing a workshop with you, and it's going to be awesome. This is maybe the first you're hearing about it, listeners. But workshop with James is coming very soon. Tell us a bit about like your approach to live streaming, kind of your like ethos when it comes to how you approach a stream mix.
So you hear a lot of some of the similar stuff from a lot of the other guys out there, but it comes my ethos comes from my pedigree, from where I come from, right? So I come from Hillsong, and while I was working on stuff at Hillsong, I was on the album team for a while and working alongside guys like Ruben and Joel. And there were things that that really came from them directly. The stuff that you listen to from those older Hillsong albums came directly from Joel and Ruben and those guys. I can remember sitting doing the mix for rehearsals on an album record, and my biggest mentor Andrew come up behind me and take my guitars and push them up, because I grew up in an AG church and like that was evil.
Yeah.
But he's like, no, this is our sound. This is where that is. And I kind of looked at it, and I was like, oh, that sounds so much better. He goes, yeah, don't be afraid to push the guitars. And, I'd be sitting next to Joel and he'd be like, hey, can I hear more crowd? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So like what that instilled in me was the sound of the house, both musically and the house itself, were important to what they were communicating on albums. And I got involved with mixing broadcast quite a lot through that process at Hillsong. And I brought, there were a lot of older guys did great mixes and stuff like that, but they were focused on making sure that the transitions, which is always very important, make sure your transitions are nailed. But like Brian was clear, the music was clear, and those were like the two main pillars. But very few guys were focused on how does the room sound? How does the crowd sound? So I flipped my mixing process. I started every single service on a flat scene. No high pass filters, no EQs, no dynamics, nothing. I think the only thing I saved in my Steam was like the types of reverbs I wanted, and they would change from time to time.
Yeah.
I did that to get reps under my belt, to be faster, more confident about what I was doing, but to train my ear. And I would always start on my ambience. For me, the most important part of my broadcast mix was the ambience mics. And thankfully at Hillsong, I didn't have to go move them. But if I'm at a new church today, I'm going to go listen to the ambience in virtual. And then I'm going to go walk out into the room and I'm going to look at where the ambience mics are placed. And if I have to move them, I'm going to move them, because that has to sound good, because that is the core foundation of my broadcast mix. And then it's the things that matter, the vocals and the drums, because today in 2024, we're still obsessed about the drum sound in live worship and all that kind of stuff. And it's engaging and it makes sense. But you have to also know that, like, if I'm mixing gospel, that's a different conversation. If I'm mixing a gospel live stream, then the conversation becomes, well, what is the most important thing in the house or in the live stream or whatever it is, right? Like, and it's going to be probably the choir or what they call the praise team, the background singers, which are really upfront, and then that the band sounds tight and response from the crowd, right? It's not about necessarily hearing the crowd sing all the time. It's about response. So you're going to prioritize the praise team and the choir, and then you're going to prioritize, the band tightness versus the crowd and how much they interact with each other, right? So it depends on what I'm doing, but overall, that's typically my ethos. So I've been in this conversation. We've had some different guys come and go at some of the places that I've been at that are ops managers or CFOs, or not CFOs, like COOs, or like, they'll make calls listening to the mix and they'll be like, hi, I don't like that it sounds like this or whatever. And I'll be like, all right, cool. I'll make the change.
Yeah.
I make the change. They're happy, no complaints. And then it'll go that way for a few weeks, and then something will happen. I'll rebuild my mix and I won't have gotten comments. So I'll slip a little bit back toward what I want to do.
Yeah.
And then I'll literally get texts. Like I got the other day, the audio director and I got a text from the worship pastor. And then, she said, I don't know what you guys are doing, but for the past few weeks, I've been getting so many compliments about the sound, both in the house and online.
Yeah.
And I can have a private conversation with the audio director going, what I did online was I kind of went back this way, and people are responding because it's the thing that person wasn't liking in the thing that he was listening on, probably laptop speakers in his 10x10 office that has no treatment. I'm delivering to the people who are engaging with the service, and they're responding and they're hooking in, and that's the point, the reason that I'm there, not to please the COO necessarily. I listen to the COO because he matters, but I'm going to make sure that, like, when the senior pastor stops me in the hallway and he says, hey, I want you to remember why I have you here. It's because when your mix is engaging with people, they're engaging with our mission and they're giving to what we're doing, and we're saving kids and we're feeding the hungry, and we're training the single mothers and that have lost their husbands through tragic events. We're educating them, out of poverty, out of slavery, out of all these things. And it's because, he literally values good production, because good production communicates the message and it captures people's attention rather than it's just another church live stream and it's pretty distorted or I can't hear anything. It's engaging. It's like, oh, cool. It's a church. Oh, this church is, what are they talking about? They're immediately gone is the production. It's not a distraction anymore. It's not a veil between the message and the listener.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, oh,
one could say it becomes immersive.
Yeah, this is true.
It comes full circle.
Yep.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love that kind of mindset on. I think that's the right mindset to have. It's got to line up, like, regardless of what it is, like whether we're talking about in-person production, online production, whatever it is, like it's got to line up with the vision and the mission of the church. And if it doesn't do that, like what are we doing? It's like, what's the point of that?
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, for sure.
I love, so on getting a little on the technical side, like I think, I'm primarily a front of house engineer. I've mixed, broadcast a handful of times, but I am fascinated by the idea of starting a mix with room mics. And like, it makes so much sense. Like as soon as you said that, I'm like, man, that is like, everybody asks like, hey, why does my stream mix not sound like the room, or why does it sound bad, or, whatever. And obviously we know, hey, it comes back to room mics, but like, can you talk a little more about like, are you great, make your room mic sound like, first of all, how do you make room mic sound good? What's your approach? But then are you literally listening? Okay, I need to kind of mix into that and bring stuff up to where like that's I've never thought to do that, and I feel like I'm probably not the only one who's like, oh hey, that makes a lot of sense. Just talk more about your like building a mix process specifically for a live stream.
Oh, you get a good front of house guy. It's the truth.
The room sounds bad. Yeah.
If the room sounds bad, the room sounds bad. It's the same thing with every other source on stage. If the drums sound bad, they sound bad. Like there's no magic. There's some magic. I mean, a little bit of sample replacement or whatever, but you're not going to fix a room.
Yeah.
Your room. Yeah. So one of my favorite guys to work with, his name is Zach, and he, for all intents and purposes, he's the audio director, and he calls the shots. But he's extremely humble and confident in his talent. So when they brought me on, he said, hey, if you got any comments, critiques or whatever, let me know. And he and I work hand in hand. And if there's something that has to change for the room to continue to sound good, I'll say it to him on comms, and he'll be like, got you. How's that? That's the conversation. It's not, oh, really? Yeah. It's I got you. How's that? You need more? Right? And I'll be like, no, it's sounding great. And it's very, very little of that service to service, because most of the time he's doing a great job, and he's got broadcast in mind. They do this at the Grammys. They do this at all these big major events where the online mix is important. The online broadcast engineer is usually a senior engineer who can call the shots for front of house, not just the broadcast guy who's only focused on broadcasting. He's like, your vocals are too loud. Sorry, my voice cracked at the perfect time. That's great.
Exactly what they sound like.
That's what they sound like.
It is, yeah, every time.
No, it's like, if I have to say a comment like that, I'd be like, hey, like the other day, it was, hey, I've got a lot of 4.5K slap from the room. Are you a little essier than normal in the house? And he's like, yeah, actually I am. Here, let me pull it down with the dynamic real quick. And 4 dB of dynamic control at 4.5K, boom, the room stopped responding in a negative way.
Wow.
And the preach became a lot clearer, and the crowd's response could be more intelligible. So it's a constructive back and forth, and that's how we always. So when I start providing that I have that situation with a front house engineer who's on it, very talented, very humble, and is willing to work with me, then I know the mix is coming out, the speaker is good for the room. And obviously tuned to PA, you would understand that, how important a PA being tuned well is. Then I'll start with my room mics, right? And I need to make sure that where they're placed is going to actually be picking crowd up, not just room, not just the ceiling. And my favorite thing is walking into a room and I'm like, where's your ambience mics? Oh, they're 40 feet above your crowd.
Yeah, right where people listen to it, right?
Yeah. So I mean, that's great ceiling mics.
Yeah.
So I'll grab a set of mics, put them on stage, get them. The stage that we're at, I'm at most of the time. The stage is 3.5, 4 foot high, which is like your typical stage height. Most churches, it's more like 1 to 2 feet, somewhere in there. But I'll get them above heads so that when they're up worshiping, I don't have the person who's praying about their deepest
right
sins.
Into it, yeah.
They're above that front row of worshipers in prayer. But they're low enough so that I'm still getting that that projection cone of singing, right?
Mhm.
I found that in most rooms, small diaphragm condensers are working way better than shotguns.
Mhm.
Shotguns are great. They're super beamy. If you have a big room and you need to get out in front of front fills and out in front of PA, and very directional behind, under the slap of the arena back wall or whatever, they're a good add to have some of that direct, that clarity. But generally the sound of the room and people singing is what you need. So small diaphragm condensers work. I'll pull them up. I'll low pass or I'll high pass out all of the boom.
Oh yeah.
And I'll keep riding that high pass out if I need to get rid of that first major room mode, like that 500, even up to 600, whatever I need to do, because none of that information is important.
Yep.
It's all space for the band.
Yeah.
What's important is that sound of the crowd singing 40 feet in front of the mic. Right. And about proximity and about air attenuation and all that kind of stuff that all matters. These are things that a lot of new guys aren't going to, know off the top of their head, but these are realities of physics and sound that travels. Right. So if I'm picking up people that are 40 feet in front of my mic, I also know that I'm not going to be getting that really crispy stuff because it's going to attenuate because of the air. So what I am going to get is top end slapback from the PA. So I'll shelf the top end down. I'll make sure that like if there's a predominant mid-range frequency that when the crowd sings loud, that's under control, whatever it is, I'll try to stay far away from 1 to 2 to 3K because that's the intelligibility.
Yep.
Right. So these are things I'm thinking about. And I make sure that the crowd sounds like a good crowd that has a PA above it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
That's a great way to put it.
I'm not going to forget the fact that there's a PA there, but and then when EQ equalized tone, when it's EQ'd and balanced for what it is I'm listening for, I'll leave that at a good level. And that's going to change because I need to set my actual targets for gain staging and loudness. So it'll change, but I'll leave it at a good level to start mixing, and I'll start mixing into it with the drums and what reverb choices you make for your snare, how you mix your snare. That changes because you have the room active. If you mix in a blind alley with your room mics off, and your drums sound fantastic, and then you bring your room mics up, and all of a sudden your snare drum sounds like a honk, honky's car from the 40s or whatever.
Yeah.
Now you're gonna where am I gonna fix the problem? Am I gonna try to carve it out of the room mics? Am I gonna or whatever wherever it is? Have you other things to think about? Have you time align things? The slap from your room mics is gonna be later than everything else, so you have the ability at broadcast to delay everything to your room mics. And make sure that you're lined up and your phase accurate so that those front stage mics are where they need to be with your other sources. So there's a little bit of work that goes into it. And, once that preliminary work is done, tuning, EQing placing the mics, queuing the mics, time aligning my sources in virtual to whatever transients I can see. Sometimes you can't really see a transient, so you have to line it up by ear as best you can. It is what it is. Then you can start mixing the rest of it in. So it's like what they say. What do they say in studio mixing? Your vocal's the most important, so you should be mixing with the vocal on all the time, right? Or you don't solo things unless you absolutely have to. Mix with everything in context. It's the same concept there.
Yeah, dude. Time aligning to your room mics is something that is so important. I think people rarely talk about it, but yeah, it's huge. And one thing that I've been doing lately, I'm curious if I'm sure you've tried this, but like. I have been like lately to kind of like dial in my room mics. I've been like going down to the front of the stage like during worship and just listening to like what does the crowd sound like? What do I hear from the PA? What does the room sound like? Like what do people singing sound like? What does clapping sound like? And I'll kind of like get into the position like roughly like where like say like one of my room mics is and just like listen to the room in real time from there. And just like really try to like make a mental note of like what am I getting from this space, and then when I go back to then EQ it, I do it with that in mind and try to like kind of recall like okay, what was I hearing? What am I not? Now what do I need to attenuate for? What do I need to enhance? What do I need to bring out in the signal? I feel like that's really like changed a lot of the way I approach room mics, is trying to get them to sound like a person in that position would hear the mix and hear the room.
Yep, totally. With the exception of the low end from the PA.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. But for me, that same process, it helps me understand if I'm constantly struggling with something on the room mics, why is that happening physically? there's something happening at the microphone that I need to go stand and listen. And if I keep not hearing crowd where the microphone is, take 2 steps over and now I can hear crowd because of that one wall and that angle is actually bouncing a third of the crowd on that side back up here.
Yeah.
Well, sweet. I'm going to move that microphone 2 feet over and make sure that the video guys are happy. But like, yeah, it really does. You move it where you got to move it, listen to what's happening. I'm really hearing a lot of the PA slap off of, at this position or this height or this angle. That's what's really helpful for me doing that. But I usually do that process that you're talking about, tonality. What does the room sound like? What does the crowd sound like here? I'll usually do that more up front. Yeah. And every time I get a chance to walk during rehearsal or whatever, I'll remind myself what the room sounds like. I'm not trying to fight it. Yeah. But yeah, so I usually do that process when I'm struggling or something's not quite right there. Yeah. And I do walk as the broadcast engineer. I walk very frequently. Lots of times we have guest engineers at front of house because, people aren't always available. And, I'll make sure this is something that I've not been asked to do. It's something that I have willingly chosen to do to help Zach when he's not around. Yeah. I'll go walk and make sure that the front of house guy who's taking his place is not struggling with whatever it is they might be struggling with because it's a brand new situation for them because they're in the environment that we're in. We're usually bringing people in from outside. Sure. And so I'm there for them, as a service to them, as a service to Zach, as a service to the service itself, to the church. Because at that point, I'm now the senior audio guy there. Yeah. My responsibility elevates from broadcast mix to stewarding audio for the house. Because otherwise it falls on my worship director who is worrying about their worship team. And that's 14 more people than I'm worried about.
Right.
Right. So I'm going to try my best to faithfully serve. And that lets me get in the room, get a direct conversation that day with that engineer about broadcast mix and how the room impacts it. And every single time it's been a great conversation. Eyes have been open. He's like, yeah, sure. Got it. Like, let me know. I'll be listening for comms. So it's been good. Yeah. I could see my camera tilting.
Oh no.
I need a better stand.
Oh man. Yeah, I love having those open lines of communication. I think it helps so much and it just cuts down on so much like potential conflict. You're like, oh man, like my broadcast mix doesn't sound good because front house mix doesn't sound good, and everybody gets mad about it or whatever. And just go talk to them. Like go talk to the people. And when everybody communicates, it works so much better. It's incredible. And yeah, I think that's just such a huge key that a lot of times kind of gets overlooked.
Yep, totally.
Yeah, for sure. What have been like some of the challenges or maybe like mindset shifts that you've had like as you've gotten into I feel like you're kind of like known as one of like the broadcast guys, like consistently having excellent broadcast mixes wherever you're at. What do you think like has changed maybe since like kind of those earlier like Hillsong days up until now? Like what are some things like you've learned and like grown in?
I don't know everything.
Yeah.
I to this day there are things. I just was messaging a guy named Tyler who's another great engineer. And I was like, he was like, man, that mix that you posted was really, really good. And I was like, yeah, I'm still struggling. My first service sounds great. My second service falls apart sometimes. Yeah. Often it's the opposite of that. But, for me, I find that my first service is great. My second service falls apart. And it's the same dynamics that happen everywhere else. It's energy, it's adrenaline, it's all that. Yep. So trying to learn how to manage that so that it's more consistent, things like that. But a big shift for me, and I mean this, like, this was actually only a couple of years ago, was I have to mix on a good environment on good speakers versus I have a set of in-ears that I can trust.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because what am I not going to get as a guy that travels around and does broadcast? I'm not guaranteed to get a good environment with good speakers, especially not speakers that I like. Yeah. The trick with monitoring is you find a speaker that you think the music you love sounds good on. Don't find the speaker that's flattest. That's the biggest lie in our industry. Your ear hears things different than my ear does, than Matt's ear, than anybody. Like it. Everybody's hearing is subjective. So a flat speaker is going to sound different to every person who hears it. It's not going to sound the same. That's a lie. So if I can't carry the speakers that I want to listen to barefoots to every room that I'm going to mix in, then what can I carry in my backpack? a good set of in-ears. And I carry reference level in-ears. I carry a 64 A18s.
Yeah.
They're mixing and mastering grade IEMs. And, you know, I've got people that look at me like, oh my God, that's a car. And I'm like, no, that's what buys me my car. Right? Like, because without that, I can't do my job to the degree that I would need to do my job. I can struggle through. Another thing that I don't know if this was a mindset shift or something I just kind of developed over time, subconsciously. Zach used to say, because when I was using speakers a lot, he'd come up and he'd sit next to me while I was mixing. He'd be like, "You are the quietest broadcast mixer that we've ever had here." He's like, "I can barely hear the speakers." And I'm like, "Right, but can you hear everything in the mix?" Well, yeah. Like, that's the point. Right? Yep. If your speakers are cranking loud, then you have no real relative idea of how loud things are when people are turning the mix down on their little iPhone speakers.
Exactly.
Right? And that comes from, I mean, listen to the old studio veterans. They'll all tell you the same thing. Turn the speakers down so far that somebody typing is annoying you. Like, right? And learn how to mix like that. Like, sure, turn up once in a while to feel the kick drum, whatever.
Yeah.
But 90% of the time, we're so low that you wouldn't be able to feel the kick drum. You need to hear the kick drum.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you'll be able to feel it when you turn it up.
Yeah. And like 95% of the people listening at home, you know, they're on a laptop, they're on a phone, they're on a sound bar without a sub. They don't get to feel the kick drum either. You know, it's like we're mixing, you know, we mix so much on feel in that way, but then that doesn't translate to the actual devices that people are listening.
High pass your broadcast streams.
Come on.
I've been putting a high pass on my broadcast outputs because those codecs that are being used to process your Facebook and your YouTube and all that, they're going to start throwing information out. Like that's just what they do. There's a plugin called Master Check. So if you're on a DAW and you have the ability that you want to throw Master Check on your monitoring bus and flip between the different codecs to hear what's happening, like if you're pushing a lot of top end, you're going to have real ugly aliasing once it gets through the codec. So you might need to mix a little darker so that when that aliasing gets added, you still have some perceived brightness.
Yeah.
You know, your low end might be getting lopped off in a very bad way. So lop it off the way you want it lopped off first.
Right.
You know, your desk print's going to always sound great when you need to listen back with the team. Yeah. But you're not going to get back whatever happens at the codec level when people are listening to service. So
yeah. Dude, that's for sure. Gosh, yeah, so much crazy stuff happens during like the encoding and decoding process, and there's nothing we can do about it. So yeah, it's like, what can we do to kind of pre-shape it and get ahead of that codec. Yeah. That's a really good way to think about it.
The other thing, this is more like last 5-10 years. As a consultant, as a designer, I've gotten there's things that I know about the encoding process, you know, delivery to streaming and CDNs and all that kind of stuff that you learn as a technical guy. That as a broadcast engineer, when I go into a church, man, you should see the looks on people's video guys' faces when I walk into the video control room and I go, "Hey, where's your encoder? Can I have a look at your settings?"
That's amazing.
And they're like, some of them are like, "Are what?" I'm like, "No, I need to go look at your video and your audio encode settings to make sure that we're not sending an 80 megabit stream out when you're going to get lopped off at 6 by most of the CDNs anyway. And then of that 6 megabits, you know, what are you reserving for audio?" So like, if you want really great audio on stream and you want it to be 320 kilobits per second, you take 6 megabits, subtract the 320 kilobits per second, and what you're left with is the maximum video bandwidth that you should be sending out. Like these are all like mind-blowing for a lot of people, but I'm like, this is part of my chain to get the audio that I'm working on to the people that are consuming it. Is what happens in your video rack at the encoding level process. And there's a level of trust that you have to build there with your technical directors or your video directors and be like, you have to trust me that I understand what it is I'm about to do to your video signal in order to make sure that the audio signal, and if they don't want me to touch it, then they don't want me to touch it. I'll be like, sweet, then I can only guarantee that my mix is great up until your encoder. Respectfully. Like it is what it is. But if you're interested in seeing if there's any way you can improve it further, I'm happy to sit down and talk with you about the delivery from the encoder to the user or the consumer at any time.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah, it's wild how much degradation can happen like almost immediately after the console or DW or whatever. Yeah,
Or
crazy.
clipping out your black magic inputs.
Yep. Not the headroom that you want.
And the meters are always wrong.
Dude, always. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, it's wild.
Oh man.
Okay. I know we've been talking about streaming stuff a bunch. Yeah, this has been I think it's going to help so many people kind of like wrap their brains around some of these concepts. Let's talk about loudness for a minute. What do you shoot for? I know like obviously every platform's got their own, LUFS target that they're, wanting you to aim for, or maybe they don't care. Who knows? Like, it's such a mystery to so many people. What do you do in terms of loudness, like trying to optimize for that?
Oh, it gets better. It gets better than just the loudness target. We're discovering now that there is a true peak target. So, and it is different with all the different platforms. It could be -1, it could be -2. Like it could be -0.1, and it is all over the shop.
Wow.
So, basically what I try to do is I try to look at all of the delivery platforms, YouTube, Facebook, whatever, find the most stringent one, stay at that target. Because what's going to happen is if I stay within those targets, then the ones that are more liberal, they do get loudness normalized, turn my stuff up.
Right. Yeah.
So that's not a bad thing. So I'll stay with the stringent one. So I'm staying at like -3. Really, I'm staying at -3.3 dB true peak. There's an Allen and Heath reason for that, and it frustrates the ever-loving daylights out of me. 10 years down the road, and we still can't change our peak values on our console. Anyway, so I'm staying at -3.3, and I'm staying at like somewhere between 15 and 13 LKFS, -15, -13. If I'm at -13, I know that when I get turned up to a -1 true peak, I'm at like -12, -10.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there.
Where we want to be. Yeah.
Much farther above that, and I'm going to be distorted. Like it just is what it is. It's the nature of things.
Yeah.
But I'm also allowing myself a level of, and I'm saying LKFS on purpose. LKFS is a gated measurement. So LUFS is a constant program measurement. It's of the time, 2 seconds, 10 seconds, all 2 minutes, or I think it's the other one. I'm not sure, but like it's over the entire time. It's whatever it's hearing. So when you drop low for preach, and he's, pauses for 3 seconds for effect, that's taken into account. LKFS is gated so that when he pauses for effect, it stops measuring until he gets above the gate threshold again.
Oh, okay.
Right?
That's super interesting.
So I tell people use LKFS, and that's a way, way better idea of what's going on. Because when he's preaching, I might be living at what I'm doing most of the time is I'm actually preparing a radio deliverable at the same time. So I have to be at a certain point. So I'm at -15. But you could be anywhere from -20 to -17 for preaching and be perfectly fine. Because, worship is going to always be a little louder. And as long as you're not substantially under that basically -10 target, you're going to be relatively okay. I'd say 20 is probably the floor. I would try not to go below 20 ever. So I'm living around 17 to 15, in that ballpark. If he gets louder when he gets excited, I'm not worried about it. But I'm not trying to push preaching to -10.
Yeah,
like that is not happening.
I've heard some guys try to do that, and it is a wild experience.
It's not natural. That's the other part. Is not all I'm trying to do is get the user to be able to hear it on their speaker, not for them to be blasted with the sound the whole time.
Dude, yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're like, man, it's like it's coming across like one person speaking is like the same volume as an entire live band and 7 singers. You're like, wait a minute, this does not compute. Like, obviously, like drastically, different, but it's like it should not be at the same level.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, it's amazing.
And for your Allen and Heath guys out there, that if you're only worried about one platform and -1 true peak is where you want to be at, you don't want to see red all the time. Limit it to -3.3 with a true peak limiter, and then after the Allen and Heath, make it up. Like so, I think I made a comment about Black Magic before. They're always 5 to 6 dB off. I can't remember. There's some. I think it's 5 is what I really think it is, but I just measured one the other day that was 6, so
Wow.
I could be wrong. But like you have 5 decibels you could turn up at the Blackmagic switcher, so you can make up 3 dB or 2 dB to get to -1 at the Blackmagic, and not have to worry about your red lights constantly being blinking off because your console's going to go red at -3.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So frustrating when you can't change where it decides peak is.
Yep. I'm like, come on, guys. This is like, and also I love that the Behringer Wing has a brick wall limiter and nobody else does.
Isn't it interesting? Yeah, they've done something. I think guitar amp sims in there. Like, that's a wild console.
Dude, jog wheels on the Surface. That's my personal favorite one.
That's because that's because it's a DAW controller, right?
Yeah.
But like they wanted it to be a console and a DAW controller at the same time. Cool.
Yep.
Good on you.
Quite some ambitions for that one.
Yep.
For sure. Well, James, this has been so fun. I've enjoyed just picking your brain on this so much.
Real talk, I learned so much today. This is great.
yeah, same. It's always such a joy to have somebody on where it's just like, oh man, this is just as much for me as it is for anybody else listening.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
And obviously,
it's a pleasure and an honor to be on.
Oh, well, appreciate that. And if you're listening to this before our workshop with James has happened, make sure you go sign up for that. If you're listening afterwards, we'll have a way to still get you into that through our Insiders group. So make sure you stay on the lookout for that. Check our socials for when that workshop will be. And until next time, happy mixing.